The lights in the studio buzzed above like a swarm of hornets. The countdown hit 0, live. Jordan Peterson adjusted his tie, his fingers steady, eyes locked on the camera. Across from him sat Natalie Reese, the progressive firebrand known for her piercing interviews on the People's Mic. She leaned forward, expression sharp, pen tapping against her notepad, a familiar rhythm that always came just before she pounced. "Dr. Peterson," she began, voice calm but loaded, "you've spoken a lot about the everyday person, the so-called silent majority. But let's be honest. Aren't these the same people who vote against their own interests, who reject progress out of fear and ignorance?" There was a pause. You could almost hear every viewer across the country hold their breath. Peterson's jaw clenched slightly. "Who do you think you are?" he said, not as a question but a line drawn in concrete. "To talk down to millions of people you've never met, whose lives you'll never understand." Natalie blinked, but she didn't look away. "I'm someone who believes in truth and calling out dangerous ideas." "No," he interrupted, his voice rising, his words clipped and deliberate. "You're someone who wraps your elitism in moral language. You're sitting in this studio in downtown Manhattan, speaking for truck drivers in Ohio, single moms in Mississippi, farmers in Iowa. You know nothing about them." The air turned thick. Even the crew behind the glass stopped moving. Natalie tilted her head. "I've studied their voting patterns, their media consumption, and they've studied your contempt," he cut in. "They feel it. They know when they're being looked down on. They know when someone like you laughs at their ignorance because they don't speak your language or share your university degrees." Her face remained neutral, but her fingers had stopped tapping. "This isn't about politics," he continued. "This is about dignity, and you just trampled on it." Natalie finally sat back in her chair. "If that's how they interpret it, maybe they need thicker skin." There it was. Peterson's response came quiet, but deadly precise. "And maybe you need a mirror." The control room director whispered into the host's earpiece, "Ratings just spiked. Don't cut." No one moved. Millions were watching. Live. Something real was happening. Something raw. The usual media fencing match had erupted into something unfiltered, something dangerous. Not rage, not performance. Just two people, one of them furious on behalf of everyone who never made it to this table. And across the country, 1,000 living rooms lit up with people leaning forward, their eyes wide as if someone had finally said what they'd been thinking for years. The segment ended in silence. The director didn't cue the usual transition music. No outro, just black screen. The studio lights dimmed. Natalie slowly unclipped her mic, not looking at Peterson. He remained still, eyes on her, as if studying something deeper than just the words she'd said. Outside, Twitter was already on fire. Peterson Live was trending #1 in less than 6 minutes. Clips of the exchange flooded every platform. Some framed it as a takedown, others called it media bias exposed. But most viewers weren't talking about politics. They were talking about tone. "How did we get here?" someone tweeted. "Why does it feel like he wasn't just defending himself but me?" Meanwhile, inside the building, Natalie walked briskly down the hallway, phone pressed tight to her ear. Her producer, Leo, was on the other end, voice tense. "That didn't go as planned." "I didn't ask you to plan it," she snapped, stepping into the stairwell. "I asked you to vet him, prep me with responses. You handed me 2 quotes and a YouTube clip. The man just pulled the floor out from under me on national television." "He didn't win, Nat. You just looked cold." She hung up. Across the city, in a modest kitchen in Queens, a retired school janitor named Thomas Hernandez watched the clip again on his cracked tablet. His granddaughter sat nearby, coloring. He wasn't a political man. Voted when he could, worked when he had to. But something about that moment, Peterson staring across that glossy studio desk, saying, "Maybe you need a mirror," it hit different. "They think we're stupid," he muttered, mostly to himself. "What, Grandpa?" "Nothing, baby." He looked out the window. Sunset hit the fire escape. Back in Peterson's hotel, his assistant Claire sat across from him on the couch, laptop open, alerts pouring in. "They want you back tomorrow night," she said. "Different host. More questions. Panel format. He shook his head. Not yet. She looked surprised. This is your moment, Jordan. You finally got through. People felt that. I know. He sipped his tea. That's why we don't rush. When truth finally gets heard, the worst thing you can do is turn it into content. Claire closed the laptop. Do you regret it? She asked after a pause. No. His voice was calm. But I regret that it had to be said that way. And in thousands of homes across America, diners, garages, bedrooms, truck stops, people weren't analyzing the words. They were replaying the tone. The silence between the lines, the nerve it hit. For once, the conversation wasn't about what side you were on. It was about whether you'd ever felt invisible, and if anyone had ever spoken up like that, for you. Natalie sat alone in her apartment, a glass of red wine untouched on the coffee table. The city skyline blinked through her window like a giant billboard of judgment. Her inbox was a war zone, some emails praising her courage, others laced with venom. She'd always thought she was the one asking the hard questions. Tonight, she'd become the question. Her phone buzzed again. Mom. She hesitated, then answered. Sweetheart, her mother's voice came cautious. You okay? I'm fine. You don't sound fine. Natalie looked at her reflection in the dark glass. I made it sound like I hate people, like I don't care about them. Do you? The question stung more than it should have. I care about truth, about justice. But those are just words if people don't feel them. Silence stretched. Natalie ended the call gently, her mother's words looping in her mind. Across town, Peterson sat at a small diner on the Lower East Side. No cameras, no followers. Just him and a cheap cup of coffee. A man approached quietly, mid-40s, mechanic's hands. You don't know me, he said, but I watched you last night, and I just wanted to say, thanks. Felt like you were speaking for someone like me, not about me. Peterson nodded, offering a tired smile. Thanks for saying that. The man nodded and walked away, leaving him with his thoughts. It was never about the win. It was about the crack that had finally appeared in the wall, the carefully rehearsed narratives, the intellectual circles that never noticed who they left out. He hadn't planned to go hard, but when she called them ignorant, them, not him, something in him snapped, him. Years of mail, letters from strangers, stories from co-workers, single parents, veterans, they all came flooding in at once. That wasn't strategy. That was defense. Not of himself. Of them. Back in her building, Natalie scrolled through comments. He destroyed her. She showed her true colors. Finally, someone stood up to smug media. But nestled in between, one stuck out. I used to admire you, but last night you sounded like you were tired of us. Like we disgusted you. I don't think that's what you meant. But it's what came through. She read it 3 times. That night, Natalie drafted a tweet, then deleted it. She wasn't ready to speak yet, not until she figured out what she actually wanted to say. Peterson, meanwhile, walked back through the cold streets alone. He didn't feel victorious, just unsettled. Maybe truth had been spoken, but now came the harder part, listening to what echoed after it. 3 days after the interview, the world hadn't moved on. Cable news spun the confrontation like a boxing match. Headlines ranged from Peterson humiliates media to arrogance versus accountability, who really won. But underneath the noise, something else was happening. In Cleveland, a high school civics teacher named Alicia Marks printed out the transcript of the interview and pinned it to her classroom wall. Her students were assigned not to debate it, but to reflect on it. How did each person speak, she asked. Not just what they said, her how. A quiet student named Elijah raised his hand. She sounded like she was angry at people for not being like her. He sounded like he'd had enough. Another student murmured. It was like he wasn't defending himself. He was defending someone invisible. That line hung in the room. Meanwhile, Natalie sat in a media consultancy office in Brooklyn. A team of image strategists buzzed around her, pulling up analytics, sentiment breakdowns, damage reports. "Engagement is through the roof," one said. "You're trending in 2 continents. This is an opportunity to double your reach if you go back on air this week." Another chimed in. "We've drafted a response, confident, firm, no apology." "You're in control." Natalie stared at them, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm not going back on camera," she said. They froze. "Not yet. Maybe not for a while." "But Natalie," she stood, "I said things I didn't mean, or maybe I meant them, but didn't realize what they sounded like. Either way, I need to figure out why I said them before I stand behind them." And for the first time in a long time, the room had nothing to say. Across the country, Jordan Peterson walked into a church basement in Indianapolis, where local workers were holding a community town hall. No cameras, no press, just folding chairs and coffee in styrofoam cups. A local nurse stood and spoke. "They keep talking about you, but really that moment wasn't about you, it was about us. That's why people are watching it on loop. We're not used to anyone on TV saying we matter." Peterson nodded, humbled. "That's what made it dangerous," he replied, "because it was too honest. And when honesty slips through the cracks in the media machine, people either cling to it or try to shut it down." There was a long silence, then soft applause. As the night ended, a man in the back approached him. "You're not a hero to me," he said. "You're just someone who didn't flinch, and right now that's rare." Peterson smiled faintly. "Good. I don't want to be a hero. Just not a coward." And while pundits kept dissecting the moment, the real shift was happening quietly, in classrooms, in kitchens, in town halls, where people weren't just watching, they were thinking. Natalie stood outside a neighborhood cafe in Harlem, hoodie up, sunglasses on, trying to disappear. But inside, she was finally trying to show up, for herself. She met with Darius, an old friend from college, who now worked as a community organizer. She hadn't seen him in years. He studied her face carefully before speaking. "Didn't think I'd see you in this zip code again." She gave a tired smile. "Didn't think I needed to be here, that was the problem." They sat down by the window, steam rising from mismatched mugs. No camera crew, no producers. Just 2 people who once thought they'd change the world and took different roads. "You know what bothered me most after the interview?" she asked. "It wasn't that people hated me, it's that some of them were right." Darius leaned back. "People like to say truth is offensive, but sometimes it's just inconvenient, especially when it forces you to look at yourself." She nodded. "I thought I was defending progress, but I was just defending a version of it that didn't include everyone." Darius smiled, not unkindly. "Now you're starting to sound like someone worth listening to." Across the country, Peterson returned home to Toronto for a brief lecture. Before taking the stage, he sat backstage alone, flipping through a journal full of letters, handwritten ones, sent to him by strangers over the years. One was from a factory worker who wrote, "I've never heard someone like me spoken about with that much care. Not even by my own union rep." Another was from a single mother. "You reminded me that being overwhelmed doesn't make me broken." He closed the journal. Those words mattered more than any headline. After the lecture, a student approached him nervously. "Dr. Peterson, how do you know when what you're saying is really helping people and not just making them feel seen for a second?" He looked at the young man carefully. "You don't know right away," he answered. "But if what you say makes someone feel human again, not small, not dismissed, that's a start. If it also pushes them to grow, then maybe you're on the right track." Back in Harlem, Natalie walked past a mural being painted, a blend of faces, workers, elders, youth, everyday people. The artist stopped her. "Hey," he said, "you're that reporter, right?" She braced herself. "I didn't like what you said," he added, "but I liked how quiet you've been since. You're thinking. Most people in your position don't." She paused. "I'm trying. That's all anyone can ask." He turned back to his brushes. "Just don't stop." For the first time in days, Natalie exhaled, not out of relief, but release. The firestorm was still out there, But inside, something quieter was growing. Understanding, not of political lines, but of people. A week later, the studio where it all began was quieter than usual. No headlines, no countdown, just 2 chairs and a small camera crew invited back for something different. Natalie sat on the left. Jordan Peterson sat across from her. No suits, no script, just 2 people again. But this time, no one was trying to win. They'd both agreed. No host, no moderators, no producers in their ears. Just a conversation. Natalie cleared her throat. "I don't want to apologize for challenging you," she began, "but I do want to apologize for how I framed the people you were defending. I spoke with contempt, and I didn't earn that right." Peterson nodded, his expression measured. "And I responded with more aggression than necessary. I wasn't just speaking to you. I was unloading 10 years of frustration onto one moment." A long pause settled between them. "I grew up around people you were defending," Natalie said quietly. "My uncle was a welder in Michigan. My aunt worked in a diner for 30 years. They weren't dumb. They were tired of being invisible." Peterson leaned in slightly. "That's what this whole thing has been about. Not left versus right, not elite versus working class. It's about how quickly we stop seeing each other." She nodded. "You were right that I forgot the difference between knowing about people and actually knowing them." He looked at her carefully. "I've seen you be brave in interviews. You go places others won't. I just wish in that moment your boldness had been in defense of the people you claim to represent." Natalie looked down. "So do I." But then she looked back up, her voice steady. "That's why I asked for this. Not to reclaim a narrative, but to start a better one." Peterson exhaled. "Then maybe this is the real interview." They both chuckled lightly, not out of relief, but recognition. Across the country, people tuned in again. But this time it wasn't for blood. It was for something they hadn't seen in a while. 2 people talking not to destroy, but to understand. Not to perform, but to repair. In living rooms and break rooms, people leaned forward not in anger, but in quiet hope. The feed ended without music, no dramatic outro. Just a black screen with 1 line of text. "Conversation isn't weakness. Listening isn't surrender. Maybe we've had enough of war." The next day, Natalie received a message from a retired coal miner in Kentucky. "You didn't win me over, but you listened. That's enough for now." And Peterson got a letter from a college student who once heckled him during a speech. "I still disagree with most of your views, but I don't think you hate me anymore, and maybe I never should have assumed you did." It wasn't closure, it wasn't agreement, but it was a beginning.